Welcome to the deep dive. This one's tailored just for you, focusing entirely on the material you've shared with us.
That's right.
Today, we're really digging into a specific set of claims, some perspectives from your sources about the war in Ukraine,
And this material, it covers quite a bit the political background, recent events.
and some, frankly, very challenging claims about how the war is supposedly being handled.
Right.
So, our mission really is just to carefully unpack the key arguments and, well, the alleged facts presented only in
Yeah.
these sources. We want to help you understand what they claim is important and why they claimed it.
Exactly. And it's worth stressing the information you've given us, it lays out a very particular narrative. The value here is understanding the specifics of this viewpoint as presented in this material.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we're just exploring the claims as they appear in your sources neutrally. We're not here to endorse them or, refute them either.
Absolutely. Just reporting what the provided material says.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's get into it. The source material puts forward a really central, quite striking claim right away.
Yeah.
It alleges that Ukraine is sending soldiers to die, but then refusing to take back their bodies.
Wow. Okay. That's a heavy claim to start with. And the source doesn't just state it, it gives an immediate interpretation too, right?
It does. It claims the situation shows Ukraine prioritizes, controlling the narrative
And a story.
over respecting the dead soldiers, or even, it suggests, protecting the living ones.
Okay. So that's the immediate, very pointed claim. How does the source connect this to the wider picture?
Well, links it to the broader political context, as the source sees it, of course. It describes a war just dragging on, no peace in sight.
Which seems fairly widely accepted.
True, but the source emphasizes a specific point here.
Ah.
It claims the U.S. has admitted the West is using Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia.
Ah, okay. And does it say anything about Russia's perspective?
It does. It adds that, according to this source, Russia has real interests at stake in the conflict.
And there's more on the international dynamics, isn't there? Something about Europe.
Yes, the source asserts something quite interesting, that Europe is apparently pushing back against Washington.
Pushing back how?
Well, the material claims Europe actually wants the war to continue.
Continue, even with the costs.
That's the claim, even at the alleged cost of more Ukrainian lives and territory. That's the picture painted in these sources.
So, given that rather stark backdrop presented in the source,
Yeah.
it perhaps isn't surprising from the source's perspective that the latest Istanbul talks didn't achieve much.
Exactly. The source describes those talks between Russia and Ukraine as having, no big breakthrough, just small steps, modest outcomes, limited results.
And the source puts some emphasis on events happening right before those talks, doesn't it? Actions allegedly taken by Ukraine?
It does. It highlights alleged attacks on civilian trains in Western Russia.
Civilian trains.
That's the claim. And also a series of drone strikes across Russia, which the material characterizes as sneaky.
Sneaky. Okay. And does the source elaborate on why it uses that term or the implications?
It raises the possibility, suggesting these drone attacks could potentially be seen as war crimes
On what grounds?
because the source alleges they involve deception.
I see. And what does the source claim was the impact of these alleged attacks?
Well, the material is pretty clear in its view. It states these actions didn't help the Istanbul talks at all.
Okay, detrimental to the talks. Anything else?
Yes, it claims they further damaged Ukraine's reputation, and it specifically mentions in Washington.
So harming relations with the U.S., according to this source.
Right. And the source even brings in a comment attributed to former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Oh, what's that?
It alleges Trump was quite blunt, saying Russia had the right to retaliate, supposedly saying they should bomb the hell out of Ukraine.
That's a strong alleged quote to include. Does the source offer any comparison?
It does offer its own perspective, noting that, in its view, Russia actually showed more restraint than the U.S. might have in a similar situation.
Interesting comparison point from the source. So what's the source's final take on these drone attacks?
The conclusion presented is that they had no real military difference, but caused significant political harm to Ukraine.
And more than that.
Yes. The source wraps up this point by concluding these attacks were likely intended specifically to sabotage the Istanbul talks.
Sabotage of the talks.
Yet, despite all this, according to the source material, Russia still went to the talks.
Right. It claims Russia's attendance sort of forced Ukraine to attend as well.
Exactly. And then the material claims Russia ended the talks with what the source describes as goodwill gestures.
Goodwill gestures. Like what?
Agreeing to swap some prisoners of war, specifically young or ill ones.
Okay. A POW swap. Anything else?
Yes, and this links back to the start, offering to return the frozen bodies of 6,000 fallen Ukrainian soldiers.
6,000 bodies. Okay, which brings us right back, as you said, to that initial claim about refusal.
Precisely. The source states that both things, the POW swap and the return of these 6,000 bodies, are hitting roadblocks.
And who does the source blame for these roadblocks?
It points the finger directly at Ukraine's leadership.
So Ukraine's leadership is blocking both, according to this material. How does the source support that claim?
Well, the assertion is that while Ukraine publicly blames Russia,
Okay.
their own statements, according to the source, actually reveal they're the ones slowing things down.
How so?
The source even claims they've complained Russia is moving too fast on these issues.
Too fast. On returning POWs and bodies, that's
No.
quite the claim.
It is. So the natural question, from the source's perspective, is why? Why this alleged delay or outright refusal, especially regarding the 6,000 bodies?
Does the source offer explanations?
It provides what it terms educated guesses.
Okay, educated guesses. What's the first one?
The first reason suggested is tied to something called the Kursk operation.
Kursk operation. Tell me about that, according to the source.
Right. The source claims, and it cites a Ukrainian parliament member for this, that most of these 6,000 bodies, they died during what the material calls Ukraine's alleged disastrous invasion of Russia's Kursk region.
An invasion of Russia. When was this supposed to have happened?
August 6th, last year, according to the source.
August 6th. And how does the source describe this alleged operation?
In very stark terms, it says it was hyped up by propagandists, but was actually reckless, suicidal.
Strong words.
Very. It alleges it wasted lives for absolutely no military or political gain.
So a complete failure, in the source's view. Does it speculate on why Ukraine might have launched such an operation if it was so reckless?
It does pose some questions, some potential motives, but it's careful to state these are without confirmation.
Right. What sort of possibilities does it raise?
Things like maybe trying to grab some Russian territory to use as a bargaining chip,
Okay.
or perhaps an attempt to change the narrative of the war, maybe influence the U.S. elections last year, or even preparing for a potential Trump victory. These are the speculative reasons floated in the source.
Quite a range of possibilities suggested. And what does the source say was the actual outcome of this Kursk operation?
Well, according to the source's view, Russia quickly retook any territory involved.
So it failed in that objective, if that was the objective.
Completely,
Okay.
according to this account. And worse, the source claims Russia is now pushing into Ukraine faster as a result and is getting close to the city of Sumy.
So a negative strategic outcome for Ukraine is the claim.
Definitely.
Oh.
And this leads to the source's main point connecting Kursk to the bodies.
Okay, what's the connection?
This is a really critical claim in the material. It states that the bodies from the Kursk operation are, quote, proof.
Proof of what?
Proof of what the source calls Ukraine's alleged reckless, hypocritical, and incompetent leadership.
Wow, okay.
And this, the source argues, is the real reason, or a primary reason, why it believes Ukraine isn't eager to bring those 6,000 bodies home, because they represent this alleged failure.
So the bodies are evidence of a military and leadership disaster, and accepting them would mean acknowledging that disaster. That's the argument from the source.
That's the first educated guess presented, yes.
Is there another reason suggested?
Yes. The material puts forward a second potential explanation, and it describes this one as a darker possible reason.
Darker. How so?
It even calls it more disturbing. And this suggestion, the source says, comes from some people, including on social media, and a Russian diplomat named Sergei Ordzhonikidze.
Okay, so drawing on other voices or claims, what is this darker reason?
It centers on money, financial consideration.
Ray, how?
The source states that under Ukrainian law, the families of soldiers who are killed in action are entitled to quite significant compensation payments.
Right. That's common in many countries. So what's the disturbing suggestion?
The material presents the idea that Ukraine's government might be deliberately avoiding accepting the bodies,
To avoid what?
to avoid triggering those compensation payments, essentially to save money.
So the claim is they might be refusing the bodies of their fallen soldiers to avoid paying compensation to the families. That is dark, as the source says.
It is. And the source offers its own judgment on this possibility, too.
What does it say?
It calls this scenario not unthinkable.
Not unthinkable.
And it adds the claim that what it terms the Zelensky regime has shown it's capable of such a lack of respect.
That's a very harsh assessment presented in the source.
Extremely. So those are the two main educated guesses the source provides for the alleged refusal, the Kursk disaster evidence, and potentially avoiding compensation payments.
And the source's overall summary of these reasons.
It concludes its perspective by stating that the reasons for Ukraine's alleged refusal to accept the prisoners and the dead are likely shameful.
Likely shameful.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the source have any concluding thoughts or calls to action?
It does make a final point, addressed towards Western supporters of Ukraine.
How does it refer to them?
It calls them the West's devoted Zelensky fan club and claims they seem blind to his flaws.
Quite pointed language. And what does the source suggest these supporters should do?
Its suggestion for them is that they should pressure the Ukrainian leader
Pressure him to do what?
to accept the prisoners and the bodies and, more broadly, to work towards ending the war. That's how the source material wraps up its argument.
Okay.
So quite a lot to unpack there. We've gone through the key claims and perspectives presented in your specific sources.
That's right.
The central allegation about refusing bodies and POWs, the political context as this material presents it, the claims about those drone attacks, and their supposed impact.
And these two quite difficult potential reasons suggested within the source for why Ukraine might allegedly be acting this way, the connection to the Kursk operation and the financial angle.
Exactly.
And really analyzing these specific claims, digging into how a source constructs its argument, even when the claims are uncomfortable. It's valuable. It helps understand the different narratives that are out there in the information landscape around complex events like this war.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It clarifies how a particular perspective is built and presented. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider based only on the material we've discussed today.
Yeah.
Given this source's specific claims about the alleged motives behind refusing bodies, the consequences of military actions like the one claimed in Kursk, the alleged financial considerations, what does engaging with this kind of very specific critical perspective add to your own process? How does exploring a narrative focused on these difficult points, like handling the dead and the alleged reasons why, shape how you evaluate information on complex international situations?
It's definitely something to reflect on, and we encourage you to